The radio static screamed, "Tiger! Tiger at 2 o'clock! We're—" The transmission cut, replaced by a sound like a giant tearing sheet metal. In the valley below, Sergeant Eli Rosenthal watched the M4 Sherman, the pride of American industry, vanish in a column of black, oily smoke. It was the third one that morning. The German 88mm gun was a monster, and the Sherman was a steel coffin. But inside that maintenance depot, surrounded by the dead, Eli saw something everyone else missed. He wasn't an engineer. He was a mechanic. And he was about to break every rule in the ordnance manual to change the course of the war. Before we continue the story of the mechanic who defied the brass, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tell me where you're listening from. Which city, which state. I'm curious to know who's brave enough to discover what happened to the Sherman tank's fatal flaw. The Sicilian sun in July 1943 was a physical weight. It baked the dust, the olive groves, and the steel hulls of the 2nd Armored Division. Sergeant Eli Fix Rosenthal shielded his eyes, the grease under his fingernails black against the glare. He was Ordnance, 3rd Maintenance Battalion, which meant his war was fought with a wrench, not a rifle. His job was to patch up the M4 Shermans that limped back. Lately, fewer were limping back. Most were just gone. The column of smoke on the horizon was marker number 4 for the day. He stood by his M32 recovery vehicle, a tank chassis with a crane instead of a turret, and listened to the radio chatter crackle with panic. "Baker 6, this is Able 1. We are non-effective. I repeat, non-effective. That 88 is chewing us up, requesting smoke." Eli didn't need to see the battle. He knew exactly what was happening. The American M4 Sherman was a mechanical marvel. It was fast, reliable, and easy to maintain. Eli loved its radial engine, the simplicity of its transmission, but it had one catastrophic flaw. Its armor was too thin, its profile too high, and its 75mm gun was a pea shooter against the new German heavy tanks. The men driving them called them Ronsons, after the cigarette lighter slogan, "Lights up the first time, every time." The Germans just called them Tommy Cookers. Another concussion echoed across the hills. Distant, flat, not artillery, an internal explosion. Eli chewed the dead stub of a cigar, his jaw tight. He'd known the crew in that tank. Young kids from Ohio. They'd shared coffee with him just this morning, bragging about the pin-up girl painted on their gun barrel. Now, they were just a statistic, a loss report he'd have to help process. The battle moved on, the sounds of machine gun fire and the deeper thump of American artillery trying to suppress the German gun. Eli and his recovery crew, Barnes and a nervous private named Miller, sat in silence, waiting for the call to go fishing. The call came an hour later. "All clear, recovery crews move up. Watch for mines." Eli gunned the engine of the M32. They rumbled over the ridge, following the tracks of the armored advance. The valley was a junkyard. 2 German Paquet anti-tank guns were silenced, their crews scattered around them. But the cost was staggering. Eli drove past the first Sherman. It was intact, but its track was blown off, immobilized. The crew had bailed. He'd get that one later. The second was just a blackened shell. The escape hatches were open, but the smell of burned paint, diesel, and something else, something sickeningly sweet, told him no one had made it out. He found the tank from the radio call, Baker 6, skewed sideways in a ditch. Its turret was blown clean off, lying upside down 20 yards away. This wasn't an anti-tank gun. This was a Tiger. Eli maneuvered the M32 alongside the hull. "Miller, hook 'em up," Eli ordered, his voice flat. Miller, pale and trembling, grabbed the heavy tow cables. Eli climbed onto the smoking hull of the dead Sherman, his boots slipping on the scorched metal. He had to inspect the damage, write the report. He found the point of impact, a neat, perfectly round hole in the frontal glacis plate. It was textbook. The German 88mm shell had sliced through the 2-inch armor plate like it was cardboard. It hadn't just penetrated. It had vaporized the interior. He looked inside the blackened cavity and immediately looked away, fighting the bile in his throat. This wasn't war. This was extermination. He jumped down, his face a mask of cold fury. "Barnes," he barked, "get the tow line taut. I'm not leaving this hull for the Krauts." As they worked, Eli spotted something in the dust. It was the pin-up girl, blown off the gun barrel, a small piece of painted steel. He picked it up, the edges sharp, and clenched it in his fist. The boneyard was Eli's kingdom. It was a sprawling field behind the division command post, filled with the metal corpses of American armor. Hulls with penetration holes, turrets ripped from their rings, burned-out engines and twisted bogey wheels. To high command, this was salvage, scrap to be catalogued and shipped back. To Eli, it was a library of failure. He spent every night there, long after his shift ended, walking among the dead with a lantern and a measuring tape. He wasn't a trained engineer from West Point. He was a mechanic from a Detroit auto shop who'd spent 10 years making broken-down Fords run on hope and sheer stubbornness. And what he saw here wasn't a strategic problem. It was a design flaw. He ran his hands over the entry hole on Baker 6's hull, now dragged back to the boneyard. The steel had spalled. The impact had sent a cone of white-hot metal fragments flying around the inside of the tank, killing the crew even if the shell itself missed them. He compared it to another wreck, one that had taken a hit from a smaller 50mm gun. That shell had been stopped, leaving a deep scoop in the armor. But the 88 didn't even slow down. He took out his notebook, filled with greasy sketches, calculations, and observations. Standard plate, 51mm, angled at 56 degrees, he muttered. Useless. A shadow fell over him. You're supposed to be processing these for parts, Sergeant. Not performing an autopsy. It was Major Strickland, the new Ordnance Liaison Officer, fresh from Washington. Strickland was a man who lived by the technical manual. He was clean, his uniform was pressed even in the Sicilian heat, and he held a clipboard like a weapon. The manual states that hulls compromised by 88mm penetration are designated Level 4 salvage. Strip them for usable parts, bogies, transmissions, and prepare the chassis for transport. Eli slowly stood up, wiping his hands on an oily rag. With respect, sir, the manual is getting these men killed. Strickland's eyes narrowed. That's a bold accusation, Sergeant. It's not an accusation, sir. It's an observation. Look, Eli pointed to the hole. This shell went through the glacis, hit the ammo storage, and the whole tank went up. If we stored the ammo lower, or if this plate was just 2 inches thicker. Strickland sighed, the picture of bureaucratic patience. Ordnance Command, in conjunction with Detroit, has determined the M4 provides the optimal balance of mobility, reliability, and protection. Our strategy is based on overwhelming numbers and flanking maneuvers, not slugging matches. Tell that to the crew of Baker 6, Eli said, his voice dangerously quiet. We're not fighting a flanking war here, Major. We're fighting in valleys and on mountain roads. It's a slugging match every damn day, and we're losing. Your job, Sergeant Rosenthal, is to follow procedure, Strickland said, his tone sharp and final. Not to redesign the Sherman tank. We are fighting a war of logistics. Every pound of extra armor you think would help means more fuel consumed, more stress on the engine, and a slower tank. The book says it's inefficient. Now get these hulls processed. Strickland turned and walked away, his boots crunching on the gravel. Eli watched him go, his hands clenched. Logistics. Inefficient. He looked back at the ruined tank. He didn't care about logistics. He cared about the flash of light, the smell of burning paint. He was a mechanic. His job was to fix things, and the M4 Sherman was broken. He stayed in the boneyard long after the sun went down, the lantern light flickering on his face. He found a wrecked German Panzerfuhr, its own armor shattered by an American artillery strike. He measured its frontal plate. It was thicker, but more than that, it was spaced. There was a gap. An idea, cold and sharp, began to form in his mind. The book was wrong, and if the book was wrong, Eli Rosenthal was about to tear it up. The plan was insane. It was unauthorized, it was dangerous, and it was a direct violation of at least a dozen ordnance regulations. Eli loved it. He cornered his crew chief, Sergeant Heavy Barnes, by the half-track the next morning. Barnes was a massive man from a Mississippi shipyard, a welder who could build a Liberty ship with his bare hands and drink a case of beer without blinking. "Fix," Barnes rumbled. "You look like you just swallowed a grenade." "Better," Eli said, unrolling a crude schematic drawn on the back of a parts request form. "I know how to stop one." Barnes looked at the drawing. It showed an M4 Sherman, but with ugly bolt-on plates of steel covering the frontal glacis and the turret cheeks. "What in Sam Hill is this? You're just adding more metal?" "Not just adding it, Heavy. We're layering it. Look." Eli pointed to his notes. "I measured the German wreck. They use spaced armor sometimes, but even just a second layer, it forces the shell to defeat 2 plates. It might shatter the penetrator before it hits the main hull, or at the very least, it'll disrupt the kinetic energy." "And where?" Barnes asked slowly. "Are you planning on getting these extra plates of armor, Eli? You think Strickland is just going to hand them over?" "No," Eli said, a glint in his eye. "We're going to requisition them." His eyes drifted across the depot to the far corner of the boneyard, where the German wrecks were piled up, waiting to be assessed by G2 intelligence. They were off limits. "Eli, that's looting enemy property. Strickland will have us in the stockade. Strickland wants me to salvage parts from our own tanks. Well, I'm salvaging. I'm just salvaging from their tanks to save ours." The logic was twisted, but to Eli, it was perfect. That night, under the cover of a half-moon, Eli, Barnes, and a reluctant Private Miller fired up the M32 recovery vehicle's crane. They worked in silence, the only sound the groan of stressed metal and the low whistle of Eli's commands. They cut massive sections of armor plate from a destroyed Panzer IV and a knocked-out Stugee assault gun. By 3 in the morning, they had dragged the heavy steel plates back to their maintenance bay, a canvas-walled tent that smelled of oil and welding torches. "All right," Eli said, pulling on his goggles. "Fire up the welder, Heavy. We're going into the modifications business." For the next 48 hours, they worked without sleep. They cut the German steel into crude, angular plates. They drilled, they cursed, and Barnes welded, the brilliant blue-white light of his torch casting giant dancing shadows on the canvas walls. They welded massive brackets to the hull of a Sherman that was in for a simple engine replacement. Then they bolted the scavenged plates onto the brackets, leaving a 4-inch gap between the new plate and the Sherman's original hull. It was the ugliest thing Eli had ever seen. The once clean lines of the M4 were gone, replaced by a patchwork, bolted-on monstrosity. It looked like something from a junkyard. They added plates to the front, the turret sides, and even layered sandbags on the deck, a common but unproven field fix. When they were done, Eli stepped back. The tank, which the crew had named Lucky Strike, now looked mean, heavy, and desperate. "She ain't pretty," Barnes grunted, wiping sweat from his forehead. "She's not supposed to be pretty," Eli said. "She's supposed to be alive." The sound of a jeep skidding to a halt outside broke the silence. The canvas flap was ripped open. Major Strickland stood there, his face pale with rage. He stared at the Franken-Sherman, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Rosenthal!" he roared, his voice cracking. "What, in the name of God and the Ordnance Department, have you done?" Eli just crossed his arms, the hot welding torch still in his hand. "Just following orders, Major. You told me to salvage parts. I salvaged them." Strickland looked like he was about to have an aneurysm. His finger trembled as he pointed at the monstrous, steel-plated tank. This abomination is a court-martial offense, Rosenthal. You have defaced government property. You have violated battlefield salvage protocols. You've compromised the structural integrity of that chassis. Do you have any idea what the weight imbalance will do to the transmission?" "It'll stress it, sir," Eli said calmly, not breaking eye contact. "But a stressed transmission is better than a detonated ammo rack. Sir, get that junk off that tank, now. You and Barnes are confined to quarters. I'm writing this up." Strickland was turning, ready to find the MPs, when a new voice cut through the tent. "Hold on, Major." Colonel Warren, commander of the 67th Armored Regiment, stepped out of the shadows. He'd been in the back of the bay, watching. Warren was a tanker from the old cavalry days, a man who smelled of leather and engine smoke. He walked slowly around the modified Sherman, tapping the new armor plate with his riding crop. "It's ugly as sin, Sergeant," Warren said, looking at Eli. "It is, sir," Eli agreed. "Strickland says it's too heavy. Says it'll break down." "She's heavy, Colonel. We added almost 2 tons of steel. She'll be slower on the hills, no doubt. But I'll take slow over dead. Warren stopped and looked at the 2 men. Strickland, the by-the-book logistician, and Rosenthal, the grease-stained pragmatist. Major, Warren said, your report is accurate. This is a violation. But my regiment is attacking a fortified crossroads tomorrow. The Germans have moved in 88s. I lost 6 tanks yesterday. 18 men. He turned back to Eli. You say this works. I say you're a goddamn lunatic. But I'm desperate. He pointed his crop at Eli. You have 24 hours. Prove it. Strickland, get me a captured PK-40 from the G2 yard. We're going to shoot this thing. If your fix works, Sergeant, I'll protect you from the court-martial. If it doesn't, he tapped the tank again, I'll let him throw the book at you. A cold knot formed in Eli's stomach. This wasn't a test. It was an execution, one way or another. The next afternoon was still and hot. They had dragged the Lucky Strike out to the division firing range, a dusty bowl surrounded by hills. 100 yards away, a captured German PK-40 anti-tank gun, the smaller but still lethal 75mm version, was manned by an ordnance crew. Major Strickland stood with Colonel Warren, binoculars raised. Eli and Barnes stood by their creation, their knuckles white. This is it, Heavy, Eli muttered. Roll the dice, Barnes grunted. Fire 1, Warren ordered. The PK-40 cracked, spitting flame. The shell crossed the distance in a heartbeat. It struck a standard M4 Sherman hull, a wreck, dragged out for comparison, square in the glacis plate. The high-velocity round punched through the armor with a sickening shriek of metal, leaving a 3-inch hole gushing smoke. Eli's crew, watching from a safe distance, visibly flinched. As expected, Strickland noted, making a mark on his clipboard. Now, Warren commanded, target the modified tank. Same spot. The PK-40 was reloaded. The gunner aimed. Eli held his breath. Fire 2! The gun fired. The shell slammed into the bolted-on German plate. The sound was entirely different. It wasn't a clean shriek. It was a deafening clang, like a giant striking an anvil. The tank shuddered violently. The outer plate was punched through, but the shell itself, deformed and losing its kinetic punch, splattered against the Sherman's main hull, leaving a massive, blackened smear and a deep dent, but not penetrating. The shock wave of the impact popped a weld on one of the brackets, but the armor held. There was a dead silence on the range. Colonel Warren lowered his binoculars, a slow, dangerous grin spreading across his face. Strickland just stared, his mouth open, clipboard forgotten. Well, I'll be damned, Warren whispered. He turned to Eli. Sergeant Rosenthal, you're a goddamn artist. Major Strickland, find this man all the scrap steel he needs. I want every tank and able company modified by ZO-600 tomorrow. The approval from Colonel Warren was a victory, but it created a new, impossible problem. Supply. Warren wanted a company of tanks, 14 Shermans, up-armored, and he wanted it done overnight. Strickland, humiliated but now following direct orders, had unlocked the motor pool's welding supplies. But the German boneyard only yielded enough scavenged plate for 2 more tanks. It's not enough, Eli, Barnes said, his face slick with sweat and soot. We've stripped every wreck. We need more steel. Thick steel. And we need it now. Eli looked at the 2 newly plated tanks standing next to the Lucky Strike. They were ugly, but they were ready. The men of Able Company, initially skeptical, now treated Eli like a high priest. They had seen the dent from the PK-40. They called the modified tanks jumbos, after the circus elephant. The crews of the remaining 11 tanks looked on with a mixture of hope and jealousy. If we can't find steel, we'll make it, Eli said, his mind racing. He was thinking of the shipyards in Mississippi, the armor plating. But there was no shipyard here. He looked at the dusty road. Miller, he yelled at the young private. Where's the nearest blown-out bridge, or railroad? Miller, startled, thought for a second. There's a rail depot about 5 miles north, Sarge, towards Troina, but it's not clear. G2 says it's in no man's land. The Germans are dug in on the hills beyond it. Good, Eli said, grabbing his M1 rifle. Heavy, fire up the half-track. We're going on a supply run. Major Strickland intercepted them as they loaded cutting torches onto the M3 half-track. Rosenthal, where do you think you're going? That's a combat zone. I'm requisitioning supplies, Major, Eli said, checking a magazine. Colonel Warren's orders. I'm supposed to give you supplies, not authorize a suicide mission. I can't protect you if you go out there. You're not giving me what I need, Major, Eli said, his voice hard. And those crews in Able Company are rolling out at dawn, with or without this armor. I'm not letting them go naked. He climbed into the driver's seat. Get in or get out of the way. Strickland looked at the determined mechanic, then at the waiting tanks. He cursed, grabbed his own helmet, and climbed into the passenger seat. If we get killed, Rosenthal, I'm putting you on report. The drive was agonizingly tense. They drove without headlights, the moon painting the Sicilian hills in a ghostly silver. The rail depot was a skeleton, bombed out by the Allies weeks before. Twisted boxcars lay on their sides. Eli found what he was looking for. Railroad track. Not ideal, but thick, hardened steel. Barnes, get the torch. Cut them into 2-foot sections. As the blue flame of the acetylene torch hissed to life, it lit up the depot like a beacon. Faster, Heavy, Eli urged, scanning the hills. A sharp crack echoed, and a bullet sparked off the side of the half-track. Sniper! Strickland yelled, diving for cover. A German machine gun opened up, the distinctive rip of an MG-42 cutting the night. Miller, lay down fire! Cover him! Eli shouted, firing his M1 toward the muzzle flash. Barnes kept cutting, sparks flying, immune to the bullets snapping around him. He was a man with a job to do. Got him! Barnes yelled, kicking the heavy sections of steel into the half-track. Go, go, go! Eli jumped into the driver's seat as Strickland and Miller scrambled in, firing their rifles back at the darkness. Eli stomped the accelerator, the half-track lurching and spinning in the gravel, bullets pinging off its armor as they raced back to their own lines. They returned to the depot 2 hours later, their vehicle riddled with new bullet holes, but its bed filled with heavy, awkward, priceless steel. The maintenance bay became a vision of industrial fury. Eli, fueled by coffee and sheer willpower, became a demon conductor. He split his crew. Barnes, the master welder, would handle the chassis. 2 other mechanics, catching Eli's fever, began cutting the heavy railroad tracks into smaller plates, designed to protect the vulnerable ammunition storage bins inside the hull. Weld them right to the sponson floor, Eli yelled over the roar of the torches. We're making a secondary wall. If they get hit, this'll stop the spall. The tankers of Able Company, awaiting their vehicles, formed a human chain, hauling the heavy steel sections from the half-track to the welders. There was no rank, only a singular purpose. Lieutenant Grange, the company commander, worked alongside his driver, both stripped to their undershirts, sweat cutting paths through the grime on their faces. Major Strickland, his uniform now as filthy as everyone else's, was managing the logistics, organizing the flow of acetylene tanks and welding rods, his clipboard now used for coordinating, not criticizing. He had seen what Eli was willing to do, and the bureaucrat had been burned away, leaving the soldier. Eli moved from tank to tank, his hands a blur. He wasn't just adding armor. He was tuning the engines, adjusting the fuel mix to compensate for the extra weight. He knew the strain would be immense, but he pushed the radial engines to their absolute limit, finding a few extra horsepower that the manual insisted wasn't there. You're redlining the torque, Strickland pointed out, his old habits dying hard. She'll hold, Eli shouted back. She has to! Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange. The air was thick with ozone, smoke, and the smell of hot metal. 11 Shermans sat outside the bay, transformed. They were no longer sleek assembly line products. They were brutal, ugly, patched-together instruments of war. Their hulls were layered with scavenged plates, their turrets reinforced with sections of railroad track. They looked like medieval knights, heavy and imposing. Lieutenant Grange climbed onto the turret of his tank, the Lucky Strike, now repaired from the PK-40 test. He looked down at Eli, who was slumped against a fuel drum, his face black with soot, his eyes red-rimmed. Sergeant, Grange said, his voice rough with exhaustion. I don't know what to say. Just bring 'em home, Lieutenant, Eli murmured, his voice barely a whisper. Just bring 'em all home. Grange nodded, a grim, respectful salute. He dropped his hatch. Able Company, start 'em up. The 11 radial engines coughed to life, settling into a deep, throbbing rumble. The ground vibrated. One by one, the jumbos of Able Company rolled out of the depot, their new armor catching the first light of the sun. Colonel Warren sat in his jeep, watching them go. He drove over to Eli. "You did it, Sergeant." Eli just nodded, too tired to speak. "Get some sleep, son," Warren said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Your part's done. Now it's theirs." But Eli knew his part wasn't done. He walked over to his M32 recovery vehicle and climbed into the driver's seat. He wasn't going to sleep. He was going to follow them, wrench in hand, as far as he could. The mechanic always stays with his machines. The crossroads at Troina was a natural fortress. The Germans, hardened veterans from the Hermann Göring division, were dug in deep. They had 80mm guns hidden in the stone farmhouses, and Tiger tanks hull down behind the ridges. It was the 88 alley that Colonel Warren had feared, and Able Company was driving straight into it. Eli and Barnes parked the M32 in a defilated position a mile back, monitoring the radio. The air was still. Too still. Then the attack began. "Able Company, advance! Line formation, watch your spacing!" Lieutenant Grange's voice was calm, but Eli could hear the tension. The first crackle on the radio was not gunfire, but a report. "Contact! 2 o'clock! Looks like a Tiger, hull down!" A pause, then the flat crack of the 88 came rolling back over the hills. Eli gripped the radio handset. "Able 4, this is Able Leader. Report." The voice that came back was shaky, breathless. "Hit! We're hit! Right in the glasses." "Casualties?" Grange demanded. "Negative. Negative, sir. We're deaf, and the paint's on fire. But the damn thing, it bounced. The armor held. We're still in the fight." A cheer erupted from the other tanks. Eli let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. The fix had worked. But the fight was just beginning. The radio dissolved into chaos. "Able 2, traversing. I've got the 88 in the farmhouse. On the way. Hit! Turret ring is jammed, but we're still moving. Tiger! Another Tiger! 9 o'clock! He's firing! The transmission was just a scream of static. "Able 6! Able 6! Report!" Grange yelled. Silence. Eli felt his stomach clench. "This is Able Leader," Grange came back on, his voice strained. "Able 6 is gone. Brewed up. Looks like a shot got in under the sponson. The rest of us, we're taking hits, but we're still pushing. The Krauts are confused. They're hitting us and we're not dying." The modified Shermans were doing exactly what Eli had hoped. They were absorbing the punishment. They were too slow to flank, but they were acting as breakthrough tanks, drawing fire, surviving hits that would have annihilated a standard M4, and allowing the other companies to move up on the flanks. Then came the call Eli dreaded. "This is Able Leader. I'm hit. Hit bad. Track's gone. Engine's dead. We're immobilized, right in the open. 300 yards from the crossroads. Kraut infantry is moving in." Eli looked at Barnes. Barnes just nodded, starting the engine of the M32. "Colonel Warren, this is Sergeant Rosenthal." Eli spoke into his own radio. "Able Leader is dead in the water. We're going in to get him." "Negative, Sergeant. That's a hot zone. You're a recovery vehicle, not a tank." "He's got my armor on him, Colonel," Eli said, jamming the M32 into gear. "I'm not letting him cook." Driving the M32 recovery vehicle into an active tank battle was suicide. It had armor, but not enough. Its only weapon was a single 50 caliber machine gun. Barnes manned the gun, firing long, disciplined bursts at the muzzle flashes from the farmhouses, keeping the German infantry's heads down. "They're popping smoke," Barnes yelled over the roar of the engine. "The Krauts! They're trying to cover their advance on Grange!" Eli stomped the accelerator, the M32 crashing through a low stone wall. He could see Grange's tank, the Lucky Strike, sitting dead, angled awkwardly in the middle of a field. It was scarred with at least 4 massive impact craters from 80D 8mm shells, but its hull was intact. German soldiers, Panzer Grenadiers, were running toward it, carrying satchel charges. The tank's own machine gun was firing, but it couldn't depress low enough to stop them. "Barnes, give 'em hell!" Eli screamed. The 50 cal opened up, a deafening roar, cutting into the German infantry. Eli spun the M32, skidding to a halt. positioning his recovery vehicle between Grange's tank and the main German line, using his own vehicle as a shield. "Hook 'em up!" Eli yelled, jumping out, grabbing the heavy tow cables. He scrambled onto Grange's tank. The hatch popped open. Grange, his face covered in blood from a head wound, looked at him. "Rosenthal, are you insane? Get your crew out, now, through my vehicle!" Eli yelled, slamming the tow hooks onto the tank's shackles. Bullets sparked and pinged off the hull around him. He could hear the hiss of an incoming mortar. "Go! Go!" Grange and his 3 crewmen, dazed and wounded, piled out of their hatch and into the open-topped crew compartment of the M32. "They're set!" Barnes yelled. "Eli, behind you! Tiger!" Eli looked up. Not 400 yards away, a German Tiger tank, emerging from the smoke, was slowly turning its massive turret toward them. The long, lethal 88mm gun was leveling at the M32. They had seconds. "Barnes, drive!" Eli screamed, leaping from the tank onto the back of the M32. Barnes didn't hesitate. He slammed the M32 into reverse, the engine screaming as it tried to drag the 35-ton Sherman. The track spun, kicking up dirt, and then it caught. The M32 lurched backward, dragging the dead Sherman with it. The Tiger fired. The sound was a simultaneous crack boom. The 88mm shell screamed past Eli's head, missing them by inches, and vaporized the stone wall they had been hiding behind moments before. "He's reloading!" Grange yelled. "Go, Barnes, go!" The M32 roared, dragging the Lucky Strike like an anchor, pulling it back toward the American lines as the 50 cal kept firing. Another American Sherman, seeing the rescue, charged forward, firing its 75mm gun at the Tiger, not to kill it, but to distract it, to make it blink. The distraction worked. The Tiger turned its attention to the new threat, and Eli's crew disappeared into the safety of a deep wadi, dragging their prize with them. By nightfall, the crossroads was taken. The German line, unable to break the invulnerable American tanks quickly, had pulled back, fearing encirclement. The cost was high. Able Company had lost 3 tanks, including the one that went up in smoke. But they had won. And more importantly, of the 12 men in those 3 lost tanks, 8 had survived. On a normal day, that number would have been 0. Eli's fix had traded steel for lives, and it was the best deal the U.S. Army had ever made. Eli sat in the maintenance bay, which now felt more like a hospital. He was stitching a gash on Lieutenant Grange's arm. The Lucky Strike sat outside, its front a blackened, pounded, concave mess of steel. It would never fight again. But its crew was sitting nearby, drinking coffee, alive. "You broke every rule in the book, Sergeant," Grange said, wincing as Eli tightened the bandage. "Yeah, well," Eli shrugged. "The book was written by guys who never met an 88. Colonel Warren and Major Strickland entered the bay. Warren looked at the surviving crews, then at Eli. "G2 has been interviewing the prisoners," Warren said, his voice quiet. "They thought we had a new tank. They thought we had shipped in heavies. Their morale broke. They hit you with everything they had, and you didn't stop. You didn't just win a crossroads, Sergeant. You won a psychological victory." Strickland stepped forward. He was holding his clipboard, but his demeanor was different. He was humbled. "Sergeant Rosenthal," he said formally, "I have filed my report. It states that the field expedient armor modifications, designated Project Rosenthal, were unorthodox." Eli tensed, expecting the court-martial. "However," Strickland continued, "they were also instrumental in the victory, saving an estimated 30 lives and 15 vehicles in this engagement alone. Your methods are disruptive, but your results are undeniable." He held out a piece of paper. It wasn't a charge sheet. It was a transfer order. "General Patton's staff wants to see you. They're sending you to England. They're planning an invasion, and they want every tank in the First Army to have your fix." Eli looked at the paper, then at Barnes, who was grinning from ear to ear. He hadn't just fixed a tank. He had fixed the doctrine. Eli Rosenthal's work in that dusty Sicilian depot rippled across the entire war. The Rosenthal fix was never his official name. It was just one of many field-expedient armor packages that mechanics and crews devised. But his use of scavenged steel, his willingness to defy the manual, and his focus on survivability over logistics forced a change in high command. The data was undeniable. Regiments using the improvised jumbo packages in Italy reported a 40% increase in crew survival against high-velocity German guns. The lessons learned from Eli's rogue assembly line were sent back to Detroit. Engineers at the Chrysler Tank Arsenal, who had been focused on mass production and reliability, were now ordered to prioritize protection. This shift in thinking led directly to the development of the M4A3E2 Jumbo Sherman, a factory-built assault tank with massively thick armor that could soak up 88mm hits. These official jumbos would lead the breakthroughs in Normandy, punching holes in the Siegfried Line. Eli's innovation wasn't just about welding steel. It was about challenging a system that valued machines over the men inside